All right, welcome to another episode of Warrior versus Zombie. And as always, I have an amazing warrior guest for you here, Mort Orman. Talk to you about him in just a second, but let me remind you as to why you're here. Success is a journey, it's not a destination. As warriors, we all have a history of ups and downs, wins and losses that are all part of making us who we are up to this point, and they provide a foundation for our path forward. We all battle our inner zombie as well as those in our world. And in each episode, I interview warriors who are aspiring leaders from all walks of life: entrepreneurs, artists, health practitioners, business owners, literally any inspired leader that has a story to tell. These warriors have a cause, they have unique value, and a vision that goes generations into the future. And Mort Orman is no exception. Dr. Mort Orman is an amazing warrior. He's a husband, a father, an entrepreneur, a physician, an author, and stress coach. His 50-year warrior journey began as a chemistry student in Duke University, followed by his MD from the University of Maryland. He then began his private practice as an MD focused on treating stress and stress-related illness, where he ultimately became a medical director and founder of the Stress Mastery Academy. Mort has been teaching people how to eliminate stress without managing it. I love that thought process. For more than 40 years, his seminars and workshops on reducing stress for doctors, nurses, veterinarians, business executives, students, the clergy, and even the FBI, boy, that's a good one right now, have been helping these warriors in some of the most high stress professions and roles to eliminate rather than simply manage stress. Dr. Orman's award-winning book, The 14-Day Stress Cure, that he wrote in 1991, is still one of the most helpful and innovative books on the subject of stress ever written. Dr. Orman and his wife, Christina, a veterinarian, live in Maryland. Dr. Mort Orman, welcome to Warrior versus Zombie. How's things in Florida today?
Well, David, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And things are great in Florida. And I also want to thank everyone who's listening for taking the time, whether you're listening live or listening on replay. I know there's lots of things we could be doing. So people who want to expand their horizons and expand their mind and learn new things, I always appreciate that. And so I want to thank all those people who were listening. So.
Well, I love that because one of the things that I coach people on, and you hit on it, is you should never take time. You should never spend time. You should never waste time, of course. You should always be thinking of time because it's your non-renewable asset as your most valuable asset.
Yeah.
Bill Gates can't buy yesterday, right? I'm always honored, and by the way, I appreciate you taking your time or investing your time in this audience. And you've already done a mastermind with my community a few months back, a while back, maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people listening to this podcast, if you like what we have to talk about here and like Mort's story and what he's doing, to go back and revisit that. And who knows, maybe we'll engage you again with our community. It's a constantly flowing group of about 2,000 people now. And so you never know who's going to show up. But anyway, so I think what we'll do, I know you told me earlier that it's a little hot there in Florida. Anything else interesting or unique going in your world today?
No, just the usual stuff. I mean, from a stress standpoint, the COVID situation and how that's put a lot of stress on people. And, even before COVID, things were stressful. For a business owner, for example, was probably stressed out pretty much before COVID, and COVID just added a lot to it. And now post-COVID, there's still a lot of remnants, a lot of stressful situations. The job force, the workforce is in flux. A lot of people chose not to go back to work or going back to work with a different, attitude. So there's all kinds of things, a lot of anger around in society in general, a lot of anxiety, a lot of substance abuse. These are all things that come from, people not being able to cope well with stress. So you just see that all over the place. You turn on the television, you listen to political discussions, you just see, stress wherever you look. If you have that prism like I have, you just see it coming out from everywhere. And COVID had a lot to do with it, but it was pretty stressful before COVID too. So
Yeah, I actually called the whole COVID time, even though I'd started the whole zombie genre or zombie thing well before what I call now the zombie apocalypse, which was COVID. Is it hasn't ended. The reality of it is, and frankly, I think one of the reasons why I was excited to have you as a podcast guest, and we're going to get into it, is the fact that I think that it wasn't the fear of the in retrospect now, the fear of the virus, if you will, was probably less stressful now than the aftermath. And I think that you're right. I think that the byproduct of that, the things that have followed, the shutdown of the economy, a bunch of other stuff, and then the quiet resignation or whatever's happening in the workforce with a lot of these companies where
yep.
people just aren't able to cope with the stress of now getting back into a new world. Yeah, I find that to be kind of fascinating, not in
Yeah.
a always in a good way, but just
What was interesting for me is the COVID, the shutdown, the way it happened so suddenly. It showed me what I knew already, but it just emphasized it that people were not psychologically and skill set wise prepared for a major stress event like that. They didn't have the skills to be able to cope with something like that. So it hit everybody pretty hard. I mean, even if you had the skills, it's still going to impact you to some degree. But you could see a lot of people struggling with the new situation they were forced into, and a lot of relationships were stressed because people had to spend more time together than they were used to. They didn't have the distractions or the time away from their partner, so it strained relationships and it strained relationship skills. So a lot of people found out they didn't have the strong relationship skills they thought they might have had, or they had the illusion that they had. So there was all that kind of stuff going on where people realized they didn't have the skills to cope. They hadn't prepared themselves in advance, and to make it even worse, they had this year or year and a half with nothing to do, a lot of time on their hand. They could have prepared themselves for the next one, but a lot of people didn't. They just did whatever they did. They didn't do any kind of self-improvement, although some people took the opportunity to do
Mhm.
that. But that would have been a great time for people to learn how to, really eliminate stress in any area of life or any kind of stress that ever comes their way. But that was another opportunity that was kind of lost. So the next thing that comes down the pike, we're going to be in the same society-wise, we're going to be in the same bad shape for coping with it than that we were before COVID hit. So it didn't really wake people up to the degree that it should have. It's like, oh boy, I really don't have strong stress coping skills, or I need my relationship skills need to improve, my ability to handle emotions, needs to get better. And people just didn't approach it that way. They just buried their head in the sand and said, well, hopefully nothing bad will happen in the future. Of course, we know how that goes.
Well, you and I have enough journey behind us to know that that's a fantasy,
Yeah.
that we're going to go into a future of no challenge,
Yes.
since life, since we're created with both the need for both challenge and support, and
Yes.
expecting the world and everything around us to support us going forward is a fantasy. And if we just think all we see is the challenge, what are we dealing with? We're depressed, right?
Yeah.
It's so, or stressed. And so that's why I'm excited. Well, let's do this.
Okay.
I want to take a quick break. And I'm really excited to hear quite a story there that we introduced you with, but kind of tell me how you got from where you started as a chemistry or wherever you want to say, and then to where you are today. And then we'll take another break and talk about what you're doing today. So let's hear a little bit of our theme song for the audio audience. It's Not the Getting There with Ricky Jean Wright. And we'll be right back with Dr. Mort Orman and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, we are back. And Mort, I can tell this is going to be a lively discussion already. But so, as I said before the break, how did you get from where you started to where you are today?
Well, let me back up and just correct one thing in the introduction that may
Okay.
have given people the wrong impression. So I didn't go into practice to focus on stress issues.
Okay.
I went into practice like most doctors go into practice, just to practice medicine.
Hmm.
And medicine is a high stress profession. There are a lot of other, and most professionals deal with stress, but business owners, corporate executives, these are all, success driven people and then in a high stress occupation, one or another. So I went into medicine like most other physicians went into medicine. And even before I got to medical school, in high school and college, I had a lot of stress, had a lot of social anxiety. I was scared to death to speak in public. I had a lot of anger issues. And those intensified in medical school and my medical training. And even when I got into practice, I had a lot of stress. And they don't teach you in medical school how to deal with it. They give you some theory about where stress comes from and the physiology of it, and the chemistry, hormones, and
Right.
all
Cortisol,
that kind of
all
stuff.
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but real life, they don't teach you how to deal with it. They just send you out, and most doctors are, pretty much realize or believe that stress is part of the job, it's part of the occupation. You just have to suck it up and do your best and pretend that you're not stressed. Well, a lot of, as doctors, we have to put on this kind of air of like nothing's bothering us and we're fine for our
Hmm.
patients,
Right.
to give them that sense of confidence and security. But we know inside we're having a lot of turmoil and things are going on that we're not handling really well, and we have to hide that from everybody. So I was in that same situation that most doctors are in, and um, so I never really, I didn't have the intention at that point to do anything to help. I was struggling with my own stress. I mean, I knew I couldn't help my patients. So it was no question of me trying to help anybody else. I couldn't help myself. And I tried all these things. I tried all the standard stuff that I had heard and read about and all the stress management techniques. And nothing really helped. And I think if I was in any other profession, I would have probably just given up hope, that I was ever going to live without stress. I just figured I'm always going to be stuck with poor relationships and a lot of anger and a lot of anxiety and my fear of public speaking and all that stuff. And the problem was being a doctor. Every day in my office, I saw 20 or 30 people, and 90% of them were carrying around lots of stress. And you follow them year after year after year, and you see them develop heart attacks and strokes and get divorced and have their businesses go under and have all kinds of, get addicted to stuff. And you're just watching this parade of damage that's being done by stress. And you're sitting there and you're going like, this train's coming for me if I don't figure this out. So I was really motivated to keep going when most people would have given up. And most people in whatever job you go to, when you go to your office, you don't see that.
Hmm.
You don't see the damage day to day that stress does to people, to their health, and not just their health, but to their lives in general. So I was seeing that every day. So that
Right.
that spurred me on. So I made a decision early on in my medical career that most doctors don't make. I made a decision to pursue personal development.
Okay.
I figured there's a lot of stuff I didn't learn in medical school that, about my patients, about people who I'm treating, and about myself. And so I started doing lots of workshops and reading books and finding people to follow that were like thought leaders. And I started expanding my mindset. And I was like, holy crap, there's a lot of stuff I'm learning that they didn't teach me in medical school about human beings
Hmm.
or about myself. And so I was getting these ahas and these insights, and eventually it led me to start to question everything that I was taught about stress. And I started thinking, well, what if all that stuff is wrong? Because I saw all kinds of other things and other areas of life that I was learning where the common conceptions were wrong, and other people had sort of figured out what's really going on, and then they were teaching those things. And so, what if everything about stress is wrong? And I had no idea whether that was true or not when I started down that path. But I decided to go down that path because it was personal to me. I needed to find out how to deal with my own stress, and nothing traditional was working. And eventually I discovered that, yeah, that's actually the case. Almost everything we've been taught to believe about stress, and this was 40 years ago,
Right.
okay? But it's still everything that's being taught today is
Hmm.
just as wrong as 40 years ago. I mean, we have so many myths and misconceptions about stress that it's no wonder why the world is so stressed out and why people have such poor stress coping skills, because we're living in this world that's just full of myths and misconceptions, or you could say zombie-like ideas, where somebody's put a virus in our brain
Right.
and it's stuck there, and we live with these beliefs that we've been given by so-called stress experts. And those beliefs keep us trapped
Mhm.
in a, one of the big beliefs is that it's not possible to live a stress-free life in today's modern world. Everybody's been taught to believe that life is just stressful, is what we've been told. Well, I found out that's not true. I used to believe it. I used to think it was true for me. I used to think I had no prayer of ever, living without stress. And then all of a sudden, over a couple year period, after being willing to consider that most of what I was taught was wrong and then try to find out, well, what is really true about stress, I eventually started having breakthroughs in my own life. I stopped being an angry person, for example. I got rid of my fear of public speaking. I never thought that was possible. My relationships, which had been really not so good, and I had 100, for example, I had 100% failure rate in all of my relationships with women consistently into my mid 30s. And I thought that was just the way it was going to be. And I eventually got insight into where that was coming from within me, how I was screwing up all these relationships, which I hadn't seen before. So I got some insight into the internal dynamics within me that was causing problems in my relationships. And once I could see what was going on, I was able to fix it. I was able to learn, what does work in relationships and put
Mhm.
those things in place. And I've been married to my wife now for 38 years. So, I mean, I had these
Congratulations.
fantastic breakthroughs. Talking about anger, I took up tennis in my late 20s. Okay. Joined a racket club, took lessons from a pro, got to be really good. But I was just, every time I would miss a shot or fail to win a point that I thought I win, I would just be furious. I would thrash around my racket. I would, make all these loud noises on the tennis court, screaming and yelling, and people next to me were, kind of, who is this wild man? And it was right around the time John McEnroe was in his heyday.
Oh yeah, I remember
So I
him.
would see him on television. I would say that's my guy. That's me.
Yeah.
And that's literally how I was on the tennis court. I was just anger and rage, and it wasn't just limited to the tennis court. It spilled over into all areas of my life. I would get angry at my patients, in my relationships. There was a lot of my parents, it was just everywhere. And I never thought I was going to get free of that, and I eventually did. So there's all these breakthroughs that I was able to have in my own life by rejecting all of the common beliefs about stress and doing the work of finding out what's really true about stress, applying that in my life. And once I did that, I said, wow, I've got something now. I've got a system for approaching stressful problems now that I can actually teach to other people. So that's when I started doing the seminars and workshops. It wasn't until I was in practice for several years and had
Mhm.
gone through that journey where I started questioning and then did the work to find out what really is true about stress. And when I came through it, I said, my God, stress is such an important health issue that as a doctor, I have to teach this. I can't have discovered this, system for dealing with stress that works really well and not share it with other people because it's so important for people's health. And that's part of my commitment as a doctor has always been to do the most I can do to help people, not just patch them up when they get sick, but to try to keep them from getting sick. And now I had something, which most doctors don't have, by the way.
Mhm.
We all wish we could keep people from getting sick, truly. We would prefer to do that. But preventive medicine today is very, very rudimentary, and we don't have skills that we really need like this. Can you really take a stressed person and put them through some kind of a program or teach them something? They come out, they're no longer stressed. Like I came out super angry, very volatile. And then over a period of a year or two, now I don't get angry. I haven't gotten angry at all, hardly in the last 40 years.
Hmm.
I was at a conference the other day, and I was sharing with somebody this anger story about being like John McEnroe, and they said, "Well, can you show me what it was like, how you were?" I couldn't do it. I couldn't mock it up. It was like it's so gone for me. The anger is so gone for me. I had a hard time actually recreating it because I hadn't done it in so long. And it was gone. So when you go through and you learn stuff like that, you can't just sit on your backside and keep it a secret. So I started doing seminars, and the seminars were wildly successful, wildly popular, and I've been doing them ever since. I've been doing them for 35 plus years, and every chance I get, somebody asks me to do a seminar, I'm happy to do it for them. And I've written 20 some books now. That was the first one you mentioned, but I've written 20 some books after that on how to eliminate different topics on how to eliminate stress. And I created National Stress Awareness Month back in 1992.
Wow.
Created a nonprofit organization to do that, and that's still going. So every year I've been the sponsor of National Stress Awareness Month for the last 32 years or whatever it is. So I've had all these successes in the area of stress, but it's still the old mindset is still so powerful that, the work I've done has been like a drop in the bucket. It's been like spitting in the ocean. I mean, there's so many people still believe the old stuff that isn't really true.
Well, one of the things is okay, so I got the zombie. One of the things I always like in this segment is to really kind of get our audience's head around the zombies that we've overcome. And again, zombie is just a metaphor for
Yeah.
challenges, insurmountable things. You hit on a few of them really in your story. One of which is uh, like most people, you started into the whole you were chemistry, then went into medicine, and often that can be when you start on a path and you realize that it's a bigger challenge or there's a direction you need to change to, you changed from just maybe family practice or what I don't know if that's what
Internal medicine. It was like family
internal
practice.
medicine.
Yeah.
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 And said, oh, I need to change. And it was clear that you consciously made that. So that was a warrior moment where
Yeah.
you said, I can't just keep going forward in this with my zombie brain and just keep doing what I did yesterday, because really my I'm going to end up with my destiny being my history, which isn't what I want. So you made that kind of, you overcame that. The anger thing fascinates me in that we often have that zombie. Well, that's just who I am, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just an angry guy.
Yeah.
I'm John McEnroe. You find somebody else in the world that mirrors what you do or does it the same way that maybe you admire, maybe you don't. You say, okay, well, I'm just like him. So that was another. That's also kind of a zombie that it sounds like you've overcome. I love the story that you can't. I have those same things, by the way, in my life where there's things that I can't do today. I don't remember how to do them that were really part of who I was. I just came from a high school reunion this last weekend, and everybody's going, I remember when you were, and that isn't me,
Yeah.
but those were, zombies in my past. What would you say if I asked you this question? And maybe there's not one, but what would you say the biggest, whether it's internal zombie or what was the biggest zombie in your life that you had to overcome if you think back on that story?
Well, there's two of them. The first one was being a trained as a scientifically trained physician and knowing the science about stress and how people, trusted that science back 40 years ago. I'm not saying anything wrong with the science. It's just it doesn't go far enough. It
Right.
just it's more of to the story.
Yes.
So the first big zombie was being willing to even question that the scientific view of stress and the expert opinions about stress and theories about stress could be wrong was a monumental jump for me to be willing to challenge that which was part of my essence, a scientifically based traditional physician. We don't question science most of the time, except when you get crazy stuff like COVID. But we're pretty grounded in science. So for me to be willing to say, "Whoa, what if that whole view of stress is skewed and
Right.
inaccurate, and what if it's actually hurting people more than helping them?" That was a major breakthrough for me to even be willing to consider. I didn't have any answers at that time, but I just had an inkling. And it
Okay.
turned out that the inkling was correct, and it led me in a direction where I finally found the answers. So, and then when I found the answers, the other big breakthrough, the answers turned out to be within me, because we're all trained. Another part of the mythology about stress is we all are trained to believe that it's the circumstances of our life or life itself that is the cause of our stress. And yes, there are stressful circumstances in life, but they alone are not the whole story. There's an equal number of causes in us that have to be there as well for those external circumstances that aren't what we desire to produce stress in us. And that's what I didn't have a clear understanding about. And I didn't have an accurate understanding of for each stressful problem I had, like anger or public speaking fear or relationship failures what were the specific internal causes within me? What were the thought patterns? What were the assumptions? What were the theories? What were the behavior patterns? Um, I didn't have a handle on what they were. I couldn't see them. I had a blind spot where I couldn't see what they were, but they were there. I eventually discovered what they were. And then once, for example, once I saw the internal thought patterns for anger in me and other human beings, I could question them. So I could say, okay, I'm angry now. So I know why I'm angry because I'm thinking A, B, C, and D. And
Hmm.
I'm behaving, X, Y, Z, whatever. And I can look at that now and I say, well, is that really true? Were my automatic, thoughts and my automatic reactions and assumptions, were they actually accurate? And a lot of times I found out they weren't. And it was like, holy shit, I got angry
Yeah.
over something I believed was true and it really wasn't true. The minute you discover that, like your anger just goes, it's
Hmm.
gone, and it may come back 5 minutes later, but it's just once you do that process where you start telling the truth about, your what's producing anger inside you internally and what's really true in the world, a lot of that anger is like misunderstandings, misperceptions, stuff you don't see that you're doing. And then after you do that for weeks and months and years, eventually you stop seeing life in the incorrect ways. So you don't generate the anger so much anymore that you used to have because now you're seeing life more clearly because you've had 1,000 corrections, where you messed it up and got angry and,
Yeah.
and saw things inaccurately. And don't forget, I have 40 years of experience using the system.
Yes.
So in the beginning, it wasn't so easy, but the more you do it, same thing with relationships. It's a process. And when you see all the ways you destroy relationships and you catch yourself, you're about ready to open your mouth and criticize your partner. Or say something really demeaning, that's not a good move in a relationship. Whether it's accurate or not doesn't matter. It's going to poison the relationship, and the other person's not going to be happy about it. So you can see yourself doing these things or thinking these things that you didn't see before. So there's thousands of zombies living in me, or thousands, what I call them gremlins,
Yeah.
misguided thoughts, things that other people have given me, ideas you would pick up from our culture, you
Mhm.
pick up on TV, movies. We get crazy ideas about stuff, and ideas about happiness. We have just completely absurd ideas about where happiness comes from, and yet everybody declares I have the Declaration of Independence says I have the right to pursue happiness. Well,
Right.
pursuing happiness is not the formula for being happy. It's the formula for being unhappy, and
Right.
for having maybe happiness once every 6 months, and then you have to pursue the next one.
Well, as the theme song of this podcast, which with those who listen to it says, it's not the getting there, it's the journey every day.
Hmm.
Happiness, just like everything else, isn't a destination.
Yeah,
It's a journey. And if you can't be happy on the journey, you're not going to be happy when you
yeah,
get to where you think it is anyway. So
yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's do this. I know we're, kind of what you're doing, you've been doing, and I really want to, I know that maybe there's some current focus or things, but let's take a quick break. I want to hear a little bit more of the theme song for the audio audience of It's Not the Getting There by Ricky Jean Wright. And then we'll come back and I want to talk about specifically today why you're doing, and you can connect it to what you've done for 40 years, of course. And then, kind of what kind of impact are you hoping to have going forward? Because there's so much value in what we're talking about today that to the warriors that will listen to this. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with Mort Orman and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, Mort. Well, you're definitely, man. I'll tell you. I mean, I have those same challenges, and you hit on a few things there. One of which is, even though you've been doing this for 40 years, and before we get done, I want to know which book of yours that I should start with or have people start with. So don't put that on your list of in our
Okay.
fourth segment. But also, I want to say it is somewhat shocking to me that there isn't more preventative focus on stress than it's more treating. It's more like we take and diagnose it as stress or put a label on it and give somebody a pill. And
Yeah.
not a fan of that, by the way, just to be
Yeah.
totally transparent. So talk to me now about what you're doing today, why you're doing, I mean, why you're doing what you're doing, what kind of value. Obviously, I can hear a lot of value in your own experience and application of your things over the last 40, your method over the last 40 years. But talk to me about that and what kind of impact you're hoping to have.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, my story could be summarized really simply as that I discovered 40 years ago how to live life stress free, how to
Mm-hmm.
live and love and work stress free. And I didn't think it was possible, and most people don't think it was possible. But now that I've done it and I know how I did it, and I've taught other people to do it, I know that everybody has that ability. I mean, I was nothing special about me. I wasn't all that talented, compared to other people. I was average, intelligence, average guy, and I just stumbled onto something that really worked and was different from what the mainstream was promoting in terms of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so I now see that this whole stress pandemic that's all around the world and has been so for decades, the whole thing could be eliminated if individuals were able to understand stress, the truth about stress, instead of the myths and misconceptions that they're stuck with. So to give you an example, we believe that stress is a thing that we suffer from. And I found out 40 years, one of the first things I discovered 40 years ago is that as human beings, we never suffer from stress.
Mm-hmm.
All the time I thought my problem was stress, it wasn't stress. Uh, it was something else. So what I discovered was that stress is just this word. It's just a word. It's just a buzzword. It was something that was invented in the 1940s by a guy named Hans Selye. Before 1940, nobody had stress. In World War I, there was no stress. Nobody complained of stress in World War One, but they had lots of problems and stuff. So stress is just a word that we use to stand for problems. That's all it is. That's all it ever has been.
Mm-hmm.
It's not some new condition. It's not a disease. It's not an affliction. It's not even something you can deal with because really what it is when you say you're stressed, it means we're having problems in our life. It's those problems that are real. So it could be anger, it could be fear of public speaking, it could be, troubled marriage, it could be conflicts with kids, it could be financial concerns, it could be COVID, whatever it is. These are individual problems that we have to cope with, and that's what we mean when we say we're under stress. Okay, so trying to deal with stress is really a ridiculous idea, but it's what everybody's taught to do. We're taught to take all our problems, lump them into a basket, label it stress, and then ask ourselves, how can I deal with my stress? And that's the minute you do that, you're not getting any specificity on your problems and you can't get to the causes. The second big myth we have is that stress management is the be all and end all for dealing with stress. It's not, it's really a crappy strategy. It mostly deals with symptoms. So if you really want to deal with your problems, like if you're getting angry all the time, you can put up a punching bag and punch the punching bag 20 times a day and feel a little bit better. And then tomorrow you're going to be just as angry as you were yesterday because you haven't gotten at the source of the problem, you know? So that's what stress management does. The best thing to do is to stop trying to deal with stress, figure out the problems you're having, and then figure out the causes of those problems, including the causes within you, which is where the real money is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get the most bang for your buck and you've got the most power. You can be the biggest warrior around those problems when it comes to understanding how you're contributing to them in ways that you weren't able to see before. So that's where people should be. That's what we should be teaching in high school and college and any other professional training. We should be teaching people, don't try to deal with stress, forget about stress, try to figure out where your problems are coming from, not only the external causes, but also the internal causes, and give people training on how to identify the internal causes, which is what I've been doing for the last 40 years and what I'm doing now, and what I believe would be the solution for the stress pandemic if everybody knew how to do that. And the media is not going to teach us how to do that. The schools aren't teaching people how to do that. I did a TEDx talk at a high school a couple years ago titled What We Should Be Teaching high school students about stress. And I explained this very same thing. And they were very receptive to the idea. And they realize they're not getting prepared for life. You shouldn't be allowed to graduate college without understanding where your anger is coming from, where guilt comes from, where frustration comes from, where worry comes from, where anxiety comes from, where relationship failures come from, where stress at work comes from. You should not be allowed to graduate college without having that grounding in education. And almost nobody gets it today. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to promote that kind of education. I'm trying to wake people up to the myths that they've been, poisoned with, that are keeping them stuck believing that they have to put up with stress, or even worse, some people actually believe stress is good for them, that it makes them more productive, which is also a myth. So that we got all these crazy ideas that we've gotten about stress that aren't really true. And my mission is to try and, debunk them and spread the word about what's really true so that people can be empowered. So they truly, I believe everybody has that warrior spirit within them. We
I
all,
agree.
and I didn't know I had it, but when I went through that process and I looked back, I said, wow, that power was in me all along. I just didn't know I had it. I could have looked inside and figured out what was going on, but I didn't. So it wasn't anything magical. It wasn't anything superhuman or any genius. It was just something I hadn't been taught to do, or I hadn't been encouraged to do. And fortunately, I got to the point where I did it, and then I could say, whoa, this is really powerful stuff. And everybody should be doing this because it would relieve a lot of the stress that we have in the world today. And that would reduce a lot of illness and
That
premature death.
Yeah, and that's one of the things back during the zombie apocalypse that I was constantly, and I think you came to our group when we did the mastermind, and I know that because people were struggling with
Yeah.
um, the things that they couldn't control, and trying to label it and saying, okay, all these stressors and all this change, and but the thing that is still the question that it still comes, and then we'll take a break and we'll go to the final segment. But it eats on me here in this conversation is 40 years, what you've discovered or what you've done for the last 40 years, and it's still a secret to many people. Again, there's so much about managing stress, and also the negative consequences of how people choose to manage stress, like alcohol,
Yep.
like drugs, like
Yep.
even pharmaceuticals. It's almost
Yep.
like there's a whole industry
Oh yeah.
around,
Yeah.
around managing stress,
Yeah. Yeah.
when in fact it's also the case in a lot of other medical areas, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've been on
Yeah.
my own wellness journey and
Absolutely.
realized that the biggest challenge I had was not what I didn't know, it was what I thought I knew that simply wasn't true. And
Yeah. As a doctor,
is that what we're dealing with here, or
as,
what?
as a doctor, we treat symptoms a lot. We might not understand what the causes are, and we treat symptoms. And fortunately, the body heals itself in a lot of ways,
Right.
which keeps us in business. Okay. Because the
Hmm.
truth is, we don't really understand a lot of the illnesses that we're treating, but we treat symptoms, and that's the thing where stress management got its birth, really, because it's a healthier way of dealing with symptoms than alcohol or drugs or even prescription medicine. So it's got a lot more healthy behaviors to it. So
Hmm.
that's why it's touted as something you should really strive for. But it's still symptoms. It's still symptom oriented for the most part. It doesn't help people do the work that I'm talking about here, where you have to get at the source of the problems,
Root cause, yeah.
root cause within you. So
Hmm.
that's really, and in medicine and in most places in society, we don't do that. But the other thing is that, there's a guy named Thomas Kuhn
Hmm.
who was a historian, a scientific historian, and he wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he looked at all the major advances in science and history, from Copernicus, people who came up with ideas that busted the mindset that was prevalent, like the flat Earth
Right.
thinking, the Earth is really round, or the Earth doesn't revolve around, or the Earth doesn't revolve around the sun, and the sun, it does. The sun doesn't revolve around the Earth.
Around the Earth revolves around
But
the sun.
whatever it
Correct.
is,
Yeah.
so these things, and he looked at the discovery of oxygen, and all this radio, X-ray. He looked at all these. He looked at all these major breakthroughs in science, and he wanted to see how long it took before that idea became widespread in the scientific community.
Right.
What was the timeline from discovery to becoming mainstream?
right.
And he found it was around 75 years.
Wow.
And his conclusion was you have to wait 75 years because you need to wait for all the people who were around when the discovery came to die because they will not change their minds.
Wow.
They
That's a
were,
scary thing in today's environment, right? In
yeah,
today's, with all of the quote science that we've established as like, okay, this is it, and anybody that doesn't say, I mean, that's
there is no, this is it in science.
yeah. Well,
That ain't science.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's it. Well, let's do this. Wow, there's so much we could cover. I think we maybe need to have another working mastermind here, another show on our Friday mastermind. But let's do this. Let's take a break, and I want to come back. And there's so many things we could take away, and there are so many nuggets here. But I want to come back and hear if we take away anything from this, what we take, and then I also want to make sure that you answer that one question: is if I get started with you, where do I start? And then we'll land the plane, and we'll hopefully hear more from Dr. Mort Orman. So let's take a quick break, hear a little more of Ricky Jean Wright, and it's not to get in there, and we'll be right back for our audio audience with Warrior versus Zombie. Well, Mort, I knew I was going to love this. We are back, and I think we're very aligned, and I love that, and I'm very thankful for your willingness to invest in our audience today because I know I've got some warriors listening to this need to hear what you got to say. So tell me, if we take away anything from this podcast, what would you want us to take away?
Uh, from what we said, I'll take three things I would emphasize.
Okay.
First is try to eliminate the word stress from your vocabulary. Whenever you hear the word stress or think about stress, just substitute the word problems and you'll be in a much more powerful position. The second thing is realize that stress management is mainly about dealing with symptoms, and most people would rather deal with causes if they could. And it is possible to learn how to deal with causes. That's what I go around teaching people how to do. It's not
Right.
easy, it's not easy to do on your own, but with somebody's help, you can learn how to do it. So I have a coaching program where I teach people my system, develop a system to help people do that. And then the last thing to take away is don't let anybody tell you that you can't learn how to live stress-free in today's world, because you can. You have that ability inside of you. You have all the tools, you have all the power, you have all the resources that I had and didn't know that I had. And it's just a matter of getting the right orientation and the right system for learning how to understand what's really going on. And you can actually create miracles when it comes to dealing with stress if you have that proper orientation. So those are three big things that I think, the audience can take away and could put them on a path to where they could end up, actually living stress-free if they put in the investment of time and effort to learn how to do it. It's not humanly impossible. It's not that life is stressful. It's that we don't understand what's really going on.
Wow. Okay, so getting stress as a label out of your vocabulary is a beautiful thing. And getting them defined as problems and then taking some tactical action to deal with the root causes is another thing
Yeah.
that I heard loud and clear.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think sometimes whether it's a workshop, a book, a coach, getting help with getting clarity on that is also an important thing, as you said. So, well, let me ask you this. I know the audience is that listens to this podcast. They're going to want to know how to follow up with you. I know that we're doing this on the Be Connected platform. I know Mort Orman, Dr. Mort Orman is findable on that platform. But beyond that, what's the best way for us to get some of the substantial amount of resources and access to you going forward?
I think the best thing for people to do is go to my website and get on my email list. And the website is very simple to remember. It's Doc Orman, DOCORMAN, like Susie Orman,
Okay.
who I'm not related to. But it's Doc Orman, DocOrman.com. And if you download the free report that's on the homepage, it's called The High Cost of Zero. And it's about the costs of stress. in our lives. And you download that free report. So it's real, 3 pages, real easy to read.
Okay.
But you'll get on my email list, and I send out emails every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I discuss a topic, break it into 3 sections each week, and try to inform people and teach people about internal causes of stress. And that'll get you going. Then at my website, there's a contact tab. So if you want to email me and set up a time to talk, if you know want to explore how I could help you, if you're interested in really learning how to use the system that I developed, and I'm still using every day in my life,
Mhm.
then I'd be happy to talk to you about that. So getting on the website is probably the best way. Most of my books are on Amazon under my name. Doc, you can look under Doc Orman. You asked what book would be a good one to start with. There's a shorter version of the 14-day stress cure called The Ultimate Method for Dealing with Stress that you can get in Kindle version or print. I think there's even an audio book for
Okay.
it. It's a short read, and it gives you an overview, of what we've been talking about today with some more examples and stuff like that. So I would recommend that as a good place to start. And in fact, if you want to, when you get on the website, if you want to message me and if you want me to send you a free copy of a PDF version of that book, I'd be happy to do that. Send me a message
Wow.
on that way.
Well, thank you, Doc Orman, DocOrman.com. Thank you for sharing with our audience today. I know in today's world, it's more needed than ever, and I like the fact that you've simplified some of the things and you've gotten clarity, and that's one of the benefits and the reasons we do the podcast. And today our attention span, we're so overwhelmed with things a lot of times that committing an amount of time, we feel so overwhelmed with the things that we label that as stress and say, I'm too stressed to be able to do, I just had a conversation, too stressed to focus on creating a list of the problems that are creating the way you feel. And I don't have time for that. Well, no, you have to, it's not a big, you said it so brilliantly. It's not this big pile of all these things and then just I got to deal with that, and that's overwhelming, but also breaking it down. So I love it. I think your investment here will pay for the people that choose to listen to the show in over and over and over again. So, but thank you for sharing. I
Yeah,
so appreciate you sharing with our
this is
audience.
this is my mission. This is what I love to do. Because there's a
Well,
lot, I mean, there's just so much misunderstanding that somebody's got to start straightening it out.
Well, thank you again for serving our audience, and I'm sure there's a future episode in this for maybe drilling down on one of these topics even a little bit more, and so I'm already my brain's going 100 miles an hour. But at this point, we're going to have to, as I say, land the plane for this episode of Warrior versus Zombie. And you'll hear a final outro of their theme song. And we'll be back next Thursday, 11 Central, for another episode at another Warrior. So listen to the final theme song, and we'll be back next week.